Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony in Diversity. Today we're speaking with Dr. Jayant Bapat, who's an academic at Monash University and a Hindu priest. Thanks very much for coming in, Jayant.
Pleasure indeed.
You're a Hindu, but a Hindu priest as well.
Yes.
Can we start with, how did you become a Hindu? What happened there? You were born a Hindu, no doubt.
In the olden times, until quite recently, it was impossible to be a Hindu, be converted to Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
Hindus were born as a Hindu person.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that actually wasn't the best thing for us, because lots of people were converted to Christianity, Islam by force historically. And lots of them wanted to go back to Hinduism, but they couldn't because the Pandits and the priests refused that.
Oh, did
but
they?
only in the last 30 or 40 years they have now a ritual which I used only 2 weeks ago for a woman who wanted to become Hindu. So that is possible now, but up until now you had to be born a Hindu.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of people wouldn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But you have another hereditary thing as well. Is you're a Brahmin, aren't you?
Yes. Well, that you are a born Brahmin, so you can't be converted to Brahminism. In the very Vedic times, very, very old times, there are examples of a Kshatriya, the next caste, turning into Brahmin, but that hasn't been possible for 3,000 years. So for all practical purposes, you are either born and in one of the 4 Varnas, as they say, classes. So you are born Brahmin or Kshatriya, which is the peasants or the warrior class. The kings came from there. Then the business people, which are called Vaishyas, and finally the people who are Shudras, the menial caste. So, but you are just born into that and you stay there.
Right. There's no movement up or down.
No movement up, has not been for the last 3,000 years.
Yeah. Yes. So fairly permanent.
Yes, fairly permanent.
Yes. So the Brahmin, there's rules around social rules, aren't there, where marriage and intermarriage, etc.
As a rule, a particular Varna, which is Brahmins, will only marry among Brahmins, and Kshatriyas among Kshatriyas, etc., etc. Of course, Brahmins being the highest caste, it was possible that they could marry the lower caste,
right?
And Kshatriyas could marry the next lower caste. So you could go down the path that way, but you couldn't come up. So, and people did go down the path, and as a result, supposing a caste is produced into Brahmins and Kshatriyas, then they had to be fitted in between. They couldn't be Brahmins, so they couldn't be Kshatriyas. They could be a bit above Kshatriyas. So they were called something else. So as a result of these permutations and combinations, we have 3,000 to 5,000 subcastes and so on and so on. Very complicated system.
So that's where that all comes from.
Yes, that's where it comes from.
Yes.
Yeah, it's called Anulom and Vilom, which is, doesn't matter. It's a Sanskrit terminology, but it just says going down the caste rung, or you can't go up. But Brahmins could go down all the way, although it was frowned upon, but they could.
They could do it, yes. How current is that? Is that, we're talking 3,000 years of history here, but India today?
India today is quite different. It's 2 systems. If you are in the village India, which is mostly India still, then it's fairly rigid. So Brahmins will remain Brahmins and they marry. But in cities, things are changing very rapidly, and especially for people who migrate to a country like Australia, castes don't exist anymore. I mean, if I go to someone's place for a worship or a ritual, I don't want to know, and they wouldn't want to tell their caste anyway. So it's that unknown now.
Yes.
But in village India, it still exists very much.
So were you born into a city or into a village?
I was born in a small town, and I was educated up to my matriculation. It used to be called VCE.
Yes,
VCE was in the town.
Yes.
Then I went to Bombay and stayed with my maternal uncle, and I did a bachelor's degree in science there. After that, I did a master's degree in organic chemistry from another place and was working there as a research chemist until I got a scholarship at Monash and came here to do a PhD in organic chemistry. After that, I got a job here and stayed, and that's
the rest of it's
the rest of it. Yeah,
is your life story.
yeah.
So did you practice as a priest before you left India?
No. Very few Brahmins have practiced as priests, of course, but Brahmins are, as a rule, used to be taught Sanskrit, which is the ancient language, like Latin.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's vanishing rapidly, so it's basically has been a dead language, but also it's not practiced as much amongst Brahmins either, or the priests. So the priests are in great demand in India. They demand a lot of money these days, because there are very few who know Sanskrit. But as a child, everyone who was in the school learned Sanskrit.
Right.
And so that came useful for me when there was an occasion when in Australia, I was the first person from Bombay state, Maharashtra state, and I was the fourth Indian in here, in Melbourne. So
really?
In 1965, there was no Indian here. It was still white Australia policy.
Good heavens.
Yeah. And I could come only because I got a Monash scholarship straight from there. Otherwise, I couldn't have come. And they also demanded a return ticket from. I had to show it to them. So they had to make sure that I did go back. But fortunately, Monash and university actually asked me to stay and so on. So I was able to stay. But anyway, to come back to the Brahminhood, most Brahmins will know basic Sanskrit and they will chant the mantras and things at home for worships and things. But they do not practice as priests.
Right.
Whereas, do you want me to go into this, how I went into this?
Yes, absolutely. But I'll tell you what, before we start on it, we're just about out of time. We'll take a break.
Sure thing. Yep.
We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Dr. Jayant Bapat, who's an academic at Monash University and a Hindu priest. You were in the process of, before I interrupted you before, of telling us about how you became a priest.
Yes.
Go over that?
Yes, indeed. Yes, as I said to you before, Brahmins know basic Sanskrit. So they are able to read the scriptures and things, but they don't. Most of them normally don't, unless there are special priests who do that. When I came here, I was the first person from my state, which is Maharashtra state, the old Bombay state, and the second in Australia. The first one and his wife were in Sydney, but because the Indians were scarce here, so I got in touch with him and we became quite friendly. He was much older, and then in a few years' time they came to see me, and she told me that she had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer, which was terminal, and she had just no more than a few months to live.
Yes.
So she said, since there's no Brahmin here to perform the last rites for me, you are the one who is going to do it.
Right,
and well, I had to say yes, of course, but I was frightened, absolutely frightened, because it was such a lot of pressure. But I had someone who taught me these things in here to some extent initially, whom I call my guru, Mr. Datar, who came here as a librarian about 5 years after I came here.
Yes.
He taught me the basic things, and that was the first ritual I did in Sydney.
Okay.
A funeral.
Yes.
Traditionally, funeral priests are different. But they don't. The normal priests, what I do now, they won't be doing funerals. So they are considered different. But in here, of course, we can't have that luxury. So
No.
everyone does everything else.
Mm.
And there are still South Indian priests here who won't do funerals.
Oh, really?
I got to do them. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So anyway, I did that. That's how I entered the sort of priesthood, you could say. And then I said, if the community needs it that much, why don't I study that? So I studied that here with this guru of mine. And then I used to go to India quite often for my field work. And there, for a few months, I learned from some pandits and so on.
Yes.
So that's how I picked up the priesthood and started doing that in a big way here.
Ah,
So
yes.
that's my entry into priesthood in a not so nice way in the sense, but still it was something that was that will remain with me for a long time. Yeah.
Absolutely. We might go on to that not very nice way in a moment, but I noticed you're wearing a hat. That's part of the priest's attire, is it?
Yes. This is one of the priest caps from our parts of India. You realize that India is 27 different countries, and
Yes,
each with a different language, 650 dialects, and the whole gamut of things. But so depends on where you are, and the caps will change, and the clothes will change to some extent. But this is from our state, Bombay state, Maharashtra state, and it changes according to where you go. Yes.
Now, you've got a bit of a story, really, because you mentioned before that it was you tripped over the White Australia policy.
I did indeed. Yes.
There's a lot of people, the younger people, would be White Australia what, because it's been gone for so long.
Yes.
But you went close to perhaps not actually being here. How did it feel at the time?
Well, I could come here simply because I got a direct scholarship, Monash University, postgraduate scholarship, while I was in India. So I couldn't be stopped basically by the government. But they had restrictions on people coming here, and they had to make sure that I had a return ticket, so that I was definitely going back. But when I completed my study, the universities wanted academics to such an extent, so badly, that they managed my visas and things, and eventually my citizenship and stuff. They helped me do it. Otherwise, when I came in May 1965, there were hardly any Indians here, no Chinese, no Asians, and it was definitely roast beef and Yorkshire pudding country. Yes. And Italians were there, Greeks were here, and they had their enclaves, but no Indians.
Yes. Well, how did that feel?
I was very welcome. That's quite strange, actually. I was very welcome because I was a novelty here. They hadn't seen too many Indians here. And I actually went and taught after my PhD in Bendigo for 18 months. And on the third or fourth day after I went there, I was invited by the mayor to his house for dinner. Because this was a PhD was coming to teach at Bendigo. My God, that was something fantastic and new. And so we were very welcome. We were looked after by the Australians. Australians, as a rule, have been extremely friendly people. It's the government policy. For some reason, it made embarrassing things for history for Australia. But the Australians were wonderful people.
Oh, that's good news indeed. You've got no terrible story.
No terrible story.
So, just going back to India for a moment.
Yes.
So, when did you leave there? In 1962 or something, was it?
65.
65.
I came here in May 1965.
65.
Yes.
Okay, right. So the India, and you've gone back and forwards quite a lot, of course. The India in 65 and the India today, what are the sort of judgments or observations you'd make from the point of view of the structure?
India is in a state of great flux. And unfortunately, well, of course, we look back and say how wonderful things were when we were young. Everyone does that.
Yes.
But I do feel that way seriously because, first of all, the population is out of control. Cities, most people are leaving villages and coming to cities. The population, just to give an example of Bombay, is almost as much as population of Australia.
Yes,
And
a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of people. And there are concrete jungles everywhere. The economy is booming, but how long can we sustain this? Can they sustain? I'm Australian.
Yeah,
But,
that's right. Yes.
is something a puzzle to me. Unless they do something like China and restrict it the growth.
Perhaps what they need to do is have some time, because we're out of it. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony in Diversity, and we're speaking with Dr. Jayant Bapat. Doctor, you mentioned before that one of the issues is population, and of course that's the case everywhere, unfortunately. But in earlier conversation you mentioned something that I thought you might care to make a comparison, where you said that the caste system in India was lessening in the big cities, but in the villages pretty much intact.
Very much so, yes.
And then you added to that in Australia it seems to it's invisible. What's the difference between those two? How would you describe your own experience of those two?
I think it's refreshing that it's so here, because people who come to Australia, Indians who come to Australia, are mostly highly educated Indians. They are IT people, they are professional people, and as a result, they are not buried down this old caste system structure.
Yes.
And therefore the families are very open families, and I, for instance, I'm an authorized Hindu marriage celebrant.
Yes.
Now, when I do marriages, I've done a few hundred of them. They are from all over India. They could be, one could be an Australian, one could be an Indian, and or they could be Buddhists and Indians and Hindus and Christians and so on and so on. So the caste system just does not exist here, even amongst Hindus. No one will ask you caste or subcaste in here. That would be considered rude.
Would it?
Yes.
Yes.
So that is wonderful. That's a great change, because they have migrated. They have taken that step of going past the country which has this entrenched thing, whereas back in Australia now, they are looking to a new life, which open life, and they are falling in love with anyone here. Or other Indians and so on, but they don't look at caste system at all. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's interesting, and because the Indians generally are totally assimilated into Australia.
They are
very, very much so.
Yes.
Which is of course a good thing. Now, as a priest in the community here, what are the sorts of duties? You mentioned weddings, you mentioned funerals. What other sorts of things do you do?
But there are two kinds of priests within Hinduism. The temple priests, who stays at temples 24/7, and he will worship that particular god or goddess, and that would be his duty. Unless someone comes to temple and say, "Can you do this for me in the temple?"
Right.
Then he's not going out and doing things. Whereas a priest like me goes to people's places or a hall that they have rented and does life cycle rituals, rites of passage rituals, and so on.
Yes.
So I do all of those, and that will include, for instance, the birth of a new baby, naming ceremony, then the threading ceremony, which is similar to bar mitzvah.
Okay.
Then, of course, weddings. Then we do fairly, they are called pujas, rituals. And people do some kind of rituals fairly routinely once every 3 or 4 months. So I'll do those pujas, blessing of houses, new houses.
Right.
Most Indians are getting huge houses now, mansions.
That's
So
right,
I'll have to go and bless that, and it's a very involved procedure for 3 or 4 hours. So I do all of these, plus of course funerals, as I said before, and that can be quite demanding, and that's
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, that's big, and
It's
with the huge number of Indians here.
Population increasing, very big.
Are there are some Indian Hindu temples around? Are there temple priests in those?
Oh yes,
there are. Right.
We have 15 Hindu temples in Melbourne now, and there are 15 or more because one can't be there all the time. So there are close to a few hundred temple priests in Melbourne. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And so, with the community, say in Melbourne, is there a percentage you could pull up to say, well, there's 25% frequent the temple, and others are more in their home? Is a breakdown like that?
No, most people, I would say, will, because they are migrants and they miss their own country, they miss their own situation where they were. There are temples galore in India everywhere, so and to various gods. They miss all of that, and initially, of course, they are very lonely in terms of religiously lonely.
Yes.
And therefore, they will try and go to a temple at many of the bigger festivals. They will make sure that they go to a temple. If not, we have the possibility of the priest coming to your place and doing a worship, because most Indians, most Hindus will have a little shrine at home.
Yes.
So they do the worship every day anyway, but on special days, almost every Indian Hindu will go to a temple. Yes.
That's so that there's a fair amount of devotion in the Hindu community. As you say, each one was oftentimes have it.
Yes, there is, and I think the simple reason is that people who migrate tend to stick to their heritage and their memories and so on. So they would be perhaps more religious than what they would have been back home. So
yes. And do you provide a service that's a bit like, say, a Catholic priest might have confession or help people in dire straits in their marriage, for example?
We don't have confessions, but I do go to hospitals, for instance, when someone's dying.
Yes.
And then he wants some prayers to be said. Yes, then there are prayers addressed to Shiva that I will chant there, and make sure that he or she is comfortable.
Yes.
And that's very much a part of Hinduism, so I do that. But we do not have confessions.
No. So, but if someone is in stress, like say a young Indian, for example, and he's a young Hindu and he's in a new environment.
Okay. Pastoral kind of service.
Yep.
As a rule, Indian priests do not do that. I do that simply because I'm perhaps the oldest Indians in here.
Right.
And so I combine that with a bit of priestly things. So they come to me quite often, and my daughters always keep saying that yours is a lodging boarding house for people here. And so people do come all the time and they will consult me. But because it's a mixture of both.
Well, talking about consulting, we've got a lot more to talk about. Would you be able to come back next week, because there's a huge topic to cover?
If you want me to, we'll be very happy to.
Thank you very much. Yes. You've been watching Harmony and Diversity. We'll be back next week, and we will be speaking with Dr. Jayant Bapat. And thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu